Here we are.
Hi, Darryl.
Hey, how are you, Cass?
I'm doing well. How are
It's
you?
so good to see you. Thank
Yeah,
you
you too. Gosh, it's
for.
been a
It's
year.
been a few. Come, I know, right? It's like, what is time anymore, right? So
I
we're
like
actually,
your I like your
yeah.
prop
So
your
so
prop
look,
styling.
I found that we have Rigamajigs here.
Oh, did you not know?
I didn't know. One of my team members said, we have Rigamajigs, right? I said, wait. So then I was like, wait, I gotta like.
Yeah,
I was trying to build the. I'm trying to build a chair.
nice. Just don't move. I can see maybe you need like a cross brace
Yeah, I do. So yeah, that's what I. Yeah, well,
to keep it from.
we can talk about the redesign in a
I
minute.
know there's an engineering term for that when it's actually like, yeah. What is that called? Oh, I know. Are you an engineer?
I am an engineer, and you
Okay.
know what? We're actually live right now, and so
Oh,
we're
okay.
gonna start the program.
Sorry.
So no, this is great, everybody. Welcome back to Engineering for Good, a live program rather focused on fun and insightful exploration of all good things related to engineering and design. I'm very excited to be back and to host today's program. I have a very exciting guest who I will introduce to you in a few minutes. But I just want to cover a few housekeeping rules. First, this is all about having fun, so please do have fun. Also, we are using, if this is on Facebook, so you can use the chat feature, ask questions, comment. We'll do our best to get to your questions throughout this conversation. This is supposed to be very light and fun, and we're here to enjoy conversation with our guests. So today we're going to talk about creativity. We're going to talk about how creativity informs design. We may ask a couple of questions and try to answer questions around is it possible to learn how to be creative? Can creativity be measured? And so our guest today is going to help us unpack some of these and other questions in our program this afternoon. So I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce the illustrious, the world famous, genuine, fun spirit, and I'll explain why I say that in a minute. Just an awesome human being by the name of Cas Holman. She's a New York-based designer and educator whose work explores the intersection of play, learning, and creativity. She has designed playgrounds, play spaces, learning materials, and toys, including the award-winning Rigamajig, which I'm actually sitting on right now. We'll talk about that in a minute. I may or may not have approached my design quite as best as I could, but again, it was sort of at the last minute that I discovered that we even have Rigamajigs here at the Franklin Institute, so that's cool. And so she's used, this award-winning Rigamajig has been used around the world by children around the world. So Cas collaborates with collaborators from all disciplines who share her passion for creating opportunities for child-directed free play. And as an associate professor of industrial design at the Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD, she prototypes her playthings on 5 acres known as Camp Fun in Hope, Rhode Island. She and her work were recently featured in the documentary series Abstract: The Art of Design in Netflix. Welcome, Cas.
Thank you,
How
Darryl.
are you? How are you?
Nice introduction.
Well, so as I said at the top of this program, I'm very excited to have Cas here. She's just done some amazing things and continues to do some amazing things around the world of design, and particularly focusing on this idea of designing for play. So I kind of want to dive into that, Cas, a little bit. First and foremost, like as a kid, right? You designed primarily for young people, but as a kid yourself, like when did you know you were creative as a kid?
No. I mean, I think to some extent, I don't know that children have the kind of necessarily the self-awareness or like practice reflection in that way.
Sure. Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
am
yeah.
I creative? Maybe I definitely remember maybe at the beginning of kind of learning about self-reflection and like, who am I in the world? I remember there being exercise where we would describe ourselves, and it was a little bit like there was a list of words we would choose from. And I do remember choosing creative and thinking like, yeah, I want to be creative. Am I creative? What does creative mean? And maybe that was because a teacher suggested I might use that word to describe myself. But I definitely just was drawn to be making things and exploring. And I think by nature was very curious, which I think relates quite a bit to creativity. So yeah, I grew up playing in the woods and kind of helping my stepdad was a mechanic, so I spent a lot of time helping him make things or tinker with any number of automobiles he was building or fixing at the time in our front yard.
Yeah.
So yeah,
this idea, yeah.
I think just I had an incredible imagination. I had a very rich time just daydreaming. I think a fair amount of my childhood.
Yeah. And so you feel like those ideas of being curious, the imagination, and daydreaming are really some core factors that influence creativity.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think part of why I know or enjoyed doing those things, or I remember doing those things, is because I had space to do them. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and we didn't have, or I didn't have a lot of kind of after school activities. So I would come home from school and have a couple hours when I was the only one home. So I would kind of make up whatever I wanted to do, right? And if it wasn't raining or snowing, I was outside climbing trees and making forts and doing whatever, riding bikes with friends.
Yeah.
And if it was raining, actually, I spent a lot of time rearranging the living room and putting on records. The Sound of Music was one, and I think, I don't know, whatever records maybe my sister had at the time. And so I would rearrange the living room and recreate music videos, or kind of redo the whole musical, dance around, and then put all the furniture back.
So you know what's so funny about that is when I was a kid, I used to do the same thing in my own room.
Oh, amazing.
But I remember a few times I would try to make my room into a haunted house.
Oh my God.
And my parents had these old records, and I don't even remember who the records were, or who were the singers and the arrangements. But I remember the music in my mind at that time was sort of haunted and like,
yeah. And so, maybe thriller based.
Maybe Thriller scared the crap out of me, to be honest with you, for a little bit. But this whole idea, right, of like thinking of being imaginative and trying to create these experiences with music and the space, and rethinking the space and the combination of those things with, what's the experience that you're trying to evoke.
And space, I think, meaning by space, and I think you do too, we mean like time, kind of
right.
room to kind of say, what am I going to do now? Or like, what do I want to do? Or even, I don't really know if I ever even had to think that, like I was always just kind of doing or excited to move on. At some point, I was saying to somebody that in my household, it was whatever we were doing, or however we felt was kind of like our own responsibility. So this idea that like my mom was responsible for keeping me busy, or was not, like if I was bored, it was my fault, So I would come and if I ever said to her, I'm bored, she would be like, why are you asking me? Like, go figure it out. Why is that my job? Like, go do what you want to do. I don't know,
Right.
So it's, and of course there are benefits to all kinds of approaches, but that I think for me made me very self-directed. Like I'm very good at making my own schedule and inventing something from nothing, I think, because of that to some extent.
That's really interesting. So you said, right, as the beginning of this conversation, you said at that particular age, it's hard to sort of conceptualize this notion of creativity or being able to define creativity. But now, given where you are now and the experiences that you've had and the skills that you have, how would you define creativity today? What does it mean to be creative?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's being able to see and imagine in a way that's different than what might be expected, or different than you might have been taught, or different from what you see already. Mm-hmm. And I think also creativity can be a way of kind of putting things together that aren't maybe again expected or aren't usually seen. I think also understanding and being able to see or make connections between things that aren't necessarily related. but could benefit from understanding each other. Like I love collaborating with people who have seemingly disparate specialties than like what can a toy designer and a neurosurgeon learn from each other and do together that wouldn't come if I were working with another toy designer, So I find that, and I love, I collaborate a lot with teachers and with early childhood psychologists and all kinds of, recently kind of a disabilities activists. So it's like bringing perspectives together and finding connections and overlap, I think is a very necessary creativity or form of creativity right now. But I mean, with children, we just see it in exploration and enthusiasm to some extent, I think is also creativity. But you can be immensely creative in we think of it in terms of art or in terms of making things, but I think you can be creative in business, you can be creative in, of course, engineering. And you can, maybe it relates to not following rules. That was a very long-winded, meandering path to definition, but I think somehow it relates to rules.
I think you're right. Yeah, not being confined by a specific way of seeing something or doing something, and then being open to reimagining and thinking about possibilities, right?
Yeah.
You do very well in how you create toys, how you think about play and the intersection of play with giving people the space to use their imagination, which I think is so important. I think we're designed as humans to be that way when we're little, and somehow we squeeze all of that out of kids as they move formal education process. And it's like, how do we reclaim that level too, right? And I think even in your case too, your primary target audience with what you do is young people, but I do think there are some interesting parallels with helping adults even thinking about or reimagining how they think about play, how they think about imagination, and all of those things, both professional as well as personal spaces.
Yeah, and play, I mean, is of course very liberating. I think in play, there's no failure, right? That trial and error is part of, like, within the umbrella of player. If you tell someone, you're playing now, there's an openness to a nonlinear process in a way that if you were to give someone the same exercise but not frame it as play, they would probably be far less comfortable taking a meandering path or not getting something right or experimenting. They definitely wouldn't experiment as much if we think like your goal is to build this thing perfectly versus like, here's some stuff, play, right? So there's something, I think there's room for exploration and certain, you could argue therefore innovation and all kinds of new things come out of it. And when it's framed as play versus when it's not.
Right.
I think for adults, that can be really useful in just the process, in any process, with the process of writing a business plan or the process of inventing a new product. Integrating play as part of the process can be immensely liberating for adults. But of course, equally as important just for mental health, but that's kind of a separate direction with play.
So a guest just wrote a question. What suggestions do you have for those who would like to bring the element of play to their quote unquote possibly boring day jobs?
Well, I think if it's on an individual level, if it's something that you can integrate into your team, into the process of your, how you work with other people, I think, be creative and look at your process and say, at what points could we make more room for exploration and experimentation? I think to some extent, there's also just some overlap with enjoying what you do, right? So, and I don't think that fun and play are the same thing, but there's something about like, if adults let themselves have fun with something, it will become more playful. there's a way you can be playful in your thinking, right? And just kind of letting yourself be playful in thinking, which sometimes can just look like, sometimes it can look like chatting almost, but also sometimes it can just be, I love playing with language. I think I'm a little bit of a semantics nerd, and just shifting the word or kind of unpacking the language we use when we're talking to other people about our ideas or about a brainstorm, I think can be quite playful, right? Like what happens if we shift, because I just looked at my blender. Now, of course, I'm going to use that. So this is a stretch. Sometimes when I let go, when I riff, but so if we switch, the word blend to the word combine, or if we switch the word blend to the word mix, like how does that change our idea about what we're trying to do, the goal or the function or the process of blending versus mixing versus combining something, right? So I think we can be playful with language also in a way that again, is I think good for communication, but also makes a process more enjoyable and rich.
I really liked, so I rewatched your episode on abstract, and again, the second time around, I was just like, I'm even more fascinated by Cas. But I liked another sort of point of intersection for us. So I, along with my colleague Jenica Davies, who I think I know,
Yeah,
so she and I,
Jenica is amazing.
Yeah, she is an amazing person. She and I co-created a course. It was a freshman, first year design course for incoming engineering students, but open to arts and science students as well. We were really intentional in creating that so that it was open to the exploration of art and design and looking at the intersections of art and engineering really through the lens of design. And I'm bringing this up because in the episode, you talk about prompts for getting students to think about how to approach the design process. And like the example you give is like, if you tell somebody to design a car, well, you've already confined what it's supposed to sort of be. Mm-hmm. But if you think about the prompt from the perspective of what is the thing or process or whatever it's supposed to do, then you open up the possibilities of whatever that particular function that you're aiming for, what that could be or what that could look like. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious in terms of like, I'm bringing this up because it sort of relates to this idea, right? Mm-hmm. Thinking outside of the box and not being confined by particular rules, but focusing more on what are the aims, what are the goals, and then designing around that as opposed to coming in with some sort of fixed notion of how something is supposed to be or what something is supposed to look like.
Yeah, it's an undefined outcome in that way, right? If you say, okay, redesign a car in that example, you're going to get more cars, right? And if you say redesign a way to get there, then it's much more open, right? Or redesign it. And I've been thinking about this a lot because at some point I tried to stop calling my, I call it my pocket computer often, but I almost never talk on it. Like, I know that this came from an innovation on the phone, right? But like, if the phone was an innovation on letter writing and, at some point we could have called it voice letters, right? And like, at what point are we going to skip? But it's so far and getting further from phone. It's interesting to me at what point we'll stop calling these phones.
That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, the language, and that if at some point, and I think that there are people, maybe they're kind of technology historians of sorts, but who look at, like the Palm Pilot versus the iPhone and like what was the perfect blend of timing. And but I wonder how much it is like the name also, Palm Pilot departed from the familiar in a way that maybe we weren't, we had to ease ourselves through. But I think that, again, language shaped what we expected of the thing. Mm-hmm. And so this, again, the semantics, I think, shapes what we expect of it, but also can limit what we expect of it. Mm-hmm. So, so prompt-wise, I think looking at what is the goal of it, right? Is the goal, is this to communicate? Is this to like communicate with people? Is this meant to communicate to the world a certain status, right? Like at some point this meant if I had this, it meant I was either important or I don't know, hip. I don't know what this communicates. In the same way that our brands communicate who we are, right? Is it a game, right? Is this a way to keep me on schedule? So this is now, do I use it as a calculator? So what is its function, right? So if I were to, and we do this, one of the exercises or a branch of that exercise with my students is, we'll talk about like the different ways that we might use this and then say, okay, now redesign a mobile way to keep myself occupied when I'm waiting at this, waiting for the subway, or maybe it's not even mobile. What's a way to keep me occupied while I'm waiting for the subway? All right, well, maybe it can be shared. Maybe it's something that lives on the platform and a bunch of people can play with each other rather than playing alone.
Right.
And or maybe if I read the newspaper if I read the news on this, this is an innovation of the newspaper, which was the town crier, right? Then what is what's another way? What if we were to redesign a way for me to stay informed with what's going on in the world?
Right.
I don't know, maybe I could look up every once in a while, right?
And your point you made earlier, how much more exciting it is to bring in other people with different skills and experiences and backgrounds to help solve those problems, right?
Yeah.
Because you come up with some really wild ideas that you would have never even thought were possible.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And expertise.
Right.
So, and related to designing for children, something that I've been thinking about a lot came from Ms. Chung, my collaborator with Anji Play. In one of my recent visits in her schools, we were talking about conflict resolution and designing for conflict resolution, right? And what does it look like? We were actually watching some kids fight over a stick, which was funny because there were two more exactly like it on the ground, but they really wanted this.
They wanted those sticks.
So, and even in that case, it's like, well, okay, so what that interaction was not about a shared resource, because there were more of that shared resource on the ground, right? So that interaction was about a negotiation and about resolving conflict. It wasn't about a stick. Yeah. So even that, and thinking about like, how can I design a way that would help them understand how to have that negotiation and have it not be a conflict, right? And I don't know if I can.
What age were the students?
They were 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So to some extent, also it's in working with people who are thinking about totally other things that kind of make me like, we'll be having these conversations and, my way in is how can I design for that? Or when we might be having them more abstractly about things like impulse control or conflict resolution. I also work with a researcher at Temple University, Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, and she and I were talking about impulse control, and that something in our culture right now is children are having a hard time with impulse control. There's not a lot of ways for them to exercise it, and so, or learn it. And I was, saying, well, okay, how might I design for that? And what's a way of playfully, and I would say, well, what currently fulfills that need, right? And things like hopscotch do, right? And so it kind of understanding, kind of putting together two different approaches and two different understandings. It's really fun for me to then kind of, from the center, we do a lot of riffing, and kind of, again, playfully talk about what might that look like? What are other ways that we can facilitate that, the process of understanding and practicing impulse control?
That's really interesting. So I do want to, because I know there's a few more questions coming in, and some are about your design process and strategies for designing and encouraging play. But I know, you're a visual person. Do a lot of drawing and doodling as you think through things. Can you walk us through your process and maybe show us a couple of examples?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, how does the mind of Cas work?
Yeah, well, that's not super pretty, but I did pull together some sketches and stuff, just to kind of give some like a quick, clean overview of the process.
Okay.
Shall I share screen?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, that'd be great.
And so this, let's see, we'll start with this. So I have two different projects that are part of a play space that I'm working on right now. And so, these are, the goal was kind of a way to have children explore balance and play with balance. And we wanted some loose parts. And so we were looking, okay, well, what's kind of a building block type loose part manipulable thing. So starting with just messy, quick sketches of all the different things they might be. And when I sketch, I include kids, always, not just for scale, but because that helps me I see a lot of opportunities as I sketch a child using it. And so just really extensive rounds and rounds of all the different shapes it might be. And then from there, kind of narrowing down and imagining again. So here's like a little more of a presentation sketch of how it might be. And then we'll go in and make, these are actually 3D printed scale models. And then here they are again. I always include children for scale, but also because it keeps the design grounded in the person who'll be playing with it. And I never use the word user. That's maybe something for any of the kind of product engineers or mechanical engineers in the audience. I find the term user, this is maybe a separate talk altogether, but I find that really just wrong. They're people. They're not users, right? In the same way that people talk about consumers, it's like we participate also, we don't just consume, right? Let's not forget that these people are children who play. And and then from there we kind of narrow it down and it's really important for me to play test. So then this was my shop in Rhode Island where we build full-scale models of these, and these are just coded, a few different materials combined to make them approximately the right weight. And then we do play testing with our, in this case, with our partner and client, the Liberty Science Center. And then from there we narrow it down again. We start to do orthographic drawings and think about them as a collection, kind of going through all the different options and narrowing it down, and then ultimately kind of landing on how it might be stored, where it might live, and what the play value might be of how that kind of where they live afterward.
So from start to finish, how long does it go from ideation to actually a fully functioning, viable product?
The longer the better, to be honest. I need deadlines because nothing is ever finished in my mind. Yeah, this is it's tricky without a deadline or a budget. I just go forever, which is fun. And my favorite part of the process is ideation. With the beginning, just like what could it be in all the different ways, and then
do you do ideation solo, or do you involve other people into the process of ideation?
It depends on the size of the project. If the project has a budget, I'll build a team. My team is Heroes Will Rise is pretty small, and the place where we tend to grow as needed is in design, in part also because a lot of the people that I like to work with have their own projects going. And so, I'll have them come in and work with me exclusively for a month or two, and then they go off and, keep doing their other projects, and then they'll come back at so the design team grows as needed. Although I will say that we are about to hire a full-time designer. So if anybody in your audience is interested. And I think the collaborating during the ideation process is really important. um, and kind of the conversations that come up when you do a pinup. I also love a pinup, so that's when we take all the sketches, put them on the wall, and you know, just talk about what's there, try to find. I like to kind of from there kind of categorize. All right, it seems like we have things that are for stacking, things that are for walking on, things that are just kind of things we would engage with our body, and things we would engage with each other, like where the blocks interact with each other versus my body interacting with the blocks, right? So from ideation, then we kind of try to find some themes, which actually helps us usually come up with a whole bunch of new ideas.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So actually, that's a great segue, I think, to what I'm sitting on, my very crude chair that I built, and obviously needs a redesign, but it serves its purpose, at least for today's conversation. So Rigamajig, how did Rigamajig come about?
So Rigamajigs started as I was working with the Friends of the Highline, which is the nonprofit organization that runs the Highline Park in New York, and they, you know, from a broad sense, their goal was, you know, Cas, can you come and how can we engage local communities and families? Because obviously, like the park is a tourist attraction, but you know, but we love our neighborhood, and we want, you know, we love that people can have like a lifelong relationship with it. And so if that starts in childhood, like how can we engage and have more of a connection with the people who live here? And so we were looking at places for play, and, you know, very quickly realized that would be very challenging since it's very crowded and it's a very long linear space. And for me, and not just for me, but kind of within designing for play, it's kind of a known that it needs a dedicated space. Like if you try to kind of put children in the midst of a flow of traffic and say play, right? It's hard, and it doesn't work. So we kind of decided that the best direction would be something that could a pop-up play opportunity that could go away on really crowded days, because it's just there wouldn't be able to be a space where children could it could be devoted just to play, which also I think is so important, that there are spaces devoted to play in a park like that. Even though I'll also say play is everywhere, that whole park is a playground, right? So the idea that we were going to have this dedicated play space was both absurd, because everything is play, it's everywhere. But at the same time, that children know that they're important enough to have a space that's kind of just for them, and where they can relax and touch everything, and not have to look both ways before running. So we decided to go with something pop-up, and then the kind of conceptual inspiration for Rigamajig, and at that point it was called the Children's Workyard Kit. The Highline has a lot of beautiful, it's so beautifully landscaped, but because it has such a high amount of visitors, of thousands and thousands of people a day, you can't actually interact with the nature, right? So for a child, I think that's kind of not the message we want to give them. Like, look at this beautiful thing, can't touch it. You know, look at this super interesting, amazing purple puffball flower, and also don't touch it, you know? So, because again, thousands of people, if everybody touched it, it would not be there. So I said, well, let's try to shift their attention to the kind of industrial detritus that is the foundation of the park. And we can do that because that's also so cool. There are all of these, like, I think of them as clues or industrial scars all along the, you know, there's like a weird rusty thing that sticks up and you're like, what is that? And then you realize, oh, that's the thing you might pull to make the train stop or go or make the tracks change. And that it's all there and you kind of notice it. And then I love the process. And as a kid, I loved this also of figuring out or imagining what it was and what it did and why is it there, right?
Yeah.
And so in an effort to kind of connect them to that or help them start to notice it, I said, well, let's make kind of a pop-up kit of parts that is like the workyard. There's nothing more fun than encountering a pile of junk, right? As a child, and being told you can play with that. So, and inspired also by adventure playgrounds in post-war Europe and what were also often called workyards, where there's just a pile of stuff and kids can make and do whatever they want to do. So therein came the workyard kit, and a couple of things that were important in the design of that. And you're sitting next to I call them wing bolts, the black, and now currently they're injection molded plastic, so they could be any color that I wanted to be, but it's important that they're black because then they look real.
Yeah.
So children encounter the Rigamajig and they say, "Oh, it's real," and it's so funny because what that means is it's not a toy, which makes them approach it very differently because they'll play more carefully, knowing that it's solid wood. It's
cool.
Yeah, and the brackets,
Perfect.
and then it was also important that the goal was to play and create things, and so them being able to kind of quickly work and rearrange it without it being kind of frustrating was important. So for me, I always set down my drill or my wrench and walk away from it, right? If I'm not paying attention, I spend half of the time trying to find my tools. And I don't think I'm alone in this. Having worked with my stepdad, the mechanic, when I was a kid, half of my job was to find whatever wrench he had set down somewhere else. So, so by flipping the wing off of the nut and putting it on the bolt and making them both very large and chunky, children don't need a wrench or a screwdriver, right? So that they can build with their hands, which is also kind of a fun thing for the 2s and 3s. The fine motor skills get developed in that.
And then it's intuitive, right? Yeah, they intuitively figure out like that. This is how you get this to go and twist into this thing, right? Yeah. And
for the really younger children, just righty tighty, lefty loosey is new, and so I'll see children play with that for 20 minutes, just understanding which way, learning and relearning how to do it. And it's a little bit, sometimes it's hard for me to not help them. But I've learned.
So I was just about to ask you that. Have you seen moments where you have the overzealous
always
or parent who comes in and tries?
Of course. Yeah, which I relate to because it's hard for me. I want to help too, but what I've learned from working with early childhood specialists is that it's so important that they do it and redo it and have to figure it out themselves. And this relates also to play and failure. By figuring it out, they learn how to not do it. And you can learn as much, if not more, from learning how to not do it, right? I agree. Yeah. So they learn 10 things instead of just one, right? Which I could also relate to prompts rather than instructions. If we say, build a way to lift a bucket, they're going to invent 10 different ways to lift a bucket. If you say build a crane, they're going to be like, well, what's a crane? I have to learn what a crane is, and then I have to recreate this crane, and what if I do it wrong? And we already know what a crane is, right? And there's a right and wrong way to make a crane. So, but really the function of a crane is to lift, I mean, obviously they do more than lift buckets, but there's this wonderful opportunity, and that's an example of name by function, right? So back to, are we designing a car or a way to get from point A to point B? So, right. So yeah, it is. And I have to stop myself often from helping, right? So you can help by maybe asking some questions or saying like, oh, what if you tried the other way? But by doing it for them, that is not helping. You're actually not helping it. You're actually robbing them of the opportunity to learn.
Discover, the discovery that comes from that too. A really great question came from a guest that just sort of applies to our broader conversation. What role does humor play in play is the question, but I actually want to change the question and say, what role does humor play in design? And particularly in how you approach creating. Are there elements of humor as you think about?
Yeah, I think I think that some of the forms, some of the shapes that I use or create, I think are quite funny in a way that I hope, and I witnessed a few times, children see and think are funny too, and it feels like kind of an inside joke. You know, I don't know if you've ever done this, but if you are using something or see something and you discover something about it and you're like, oh, that designer, that was smart, you know, and then you're like, oh yeah, we both, yeah. And sometimes it's intentional or you don't know if it's intentional. I think that's also kind of nice when you're like, you both kind of, like it feels like it was maybe for you or a relationship that you have with that object that, you know, you get it, right? You feel like you understand each other.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, for me in the design process and in how we kind of try to market and communicate the products, I remind myself often not to take myself too seriously. And I think that humor helps with that immensely.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So I know we're climbing out of a pandemic, and the last year and some has been trying for all of us in various ways. How has this has the pandemic and played or reshaped any of your thinking around design and play and your approach to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So much. In part, you know, I think everything that I design is meant to create the conditions for collaboration and communication. And so that's been really hard for me to imagine and just like witness children not being able to play together. And just even as a human, I mean, more than as designer, as a human, I think it's terrifying to learn to not, I mean, and for me personally, it's hard to not touch or see or talk to or interact with people. And I mean, I do think children are resilient. I think they'll probably get over this faster than the adults will. but it's not, it's definitely for me, it's scary to imagine that a lot of children have had more than half of their lives or a big part of their lives spent learning not to hug or not to interact and getting used to not being able to communicate with our faces. And so, yeah, I think that collaborative and hands-on play opportunities are more important than ever. Absolutely more important. And I mean, we'll see, time will tell how we'll kind of help children come out of it.
I'm curious too, thinking about, because a lot of what you do is very tactile and it requires, there's the collaborative piece that you just described, but thinking too about, you know, COVID is largely an airborne virus, but this idea of thinking about health and safety and things of that nature, are there any design considerations related to the types of materials that you choose when you're designing and thinking about, you know, there was the big antimicrobial movement, but then learning that that's not necessarily the best for children either, because they need to develop their immune systems. And if you overprotect them, then that actually it becomes, it has negative consequences as opposed to positive consequences. But are there any thoughts there that you and your teams have been thinking about in terms of rethinking design in that way, or not really?
No, absolutely. And I might have to grab my charger. I didn't. Okay. Hold on one second.
Sure. No problem, right? That's the thing with technology, right?
Speaking of.
No problem at all.
There we go. Luckily that was quick. I did not notice how low I was. You know, I think that we think about this fairly often because being in schools and institutions, more from a, like, when it's really dirty, how will it be cleaned, right? And so, like, you know, the nuts and bolts can go in a dishwasher or a washing machine. The the wood is finished in a way that it's non-porous, so it can be kind of wiped down or hosed off or whatever. But yeah, this did bring up, I think, loose part. It was the last year has been tricky for loose parts in general. Loose parts just meaning manipulables and bits and pieces that theoretically each one has to be individually wiped down. And most children's museums that did stay open at limited capacity just kind of couldn't use any of those materials, which was unfortunate. And the new project that I've been working on through the pandemic, which is a play space for the Liberty Science Center, we had multiple times where we kind of had to pause and say, should we design this space with social distancing in mind? You know, which really meant, should we back up and rewrite the entire design brief? You know, because when we started, it was pre-pandemic, and half of the goal of the space was about collaboration and interaction and using your body to explore things, you know. So it was hard. And what was really helpful and I think inspiring and reassuring to me was that their team and Liza Rawson, the director there, or the director of programming or installations, I'm not sure her exact title, but you know, she was just steadfast in her belief that no, we'll be back. Like, this isn't something that's going to go away forever. You know, this is not the new permanent state. Like, we'll be able to stand next to a stranger again, and 4-year-olds will be able to play together. You know? So we kind of kept soldiering on. But for the play testing, and actually the photos that I showed of the large balance pieces, the kind of block type things, that we play tested kind of in the middle with social distancing, and we had to go in and wipe down everyone after every child left, which is also strange. Like, it's the opposite message that I would ever want a child to hear, which is like, I have to wipe it down. It's like this underlying, like, you're dirty or like you're not clean. Like, all of it's just, yeah, they'll get over it. But in the meantime, it's like horrifying to me that we're communicating to them like everything has to be bleached and I can't touch things, and like, that's dirt, don't touch something somebody else. All of it's just like the opposite of what I would ever want.
Yeah, it's strange coming as we come out of this, and I agree. I think, you know, this is a temporary state of discomfort, and I think in some ways it's also made us think differently. It's helped with us thinking more about resiliency, and things of that nature. So I know we're almost wrapping up here. I just have one more question. So a guest asks, from a methods perspective, do you have any methods you use to expand your creativity if you ever run into designer's block?
Oh yeah, for me, designer's block is more like my critic becomes very present, right? And my critic sometimes is actually very related to the engineering, because a lot of the things that I design feel somewhat impossible to actually make, right? Since I'm designing as a product designer, I design for children and for play, right? And then, so I start from that and then figure out how to make it. Whereas I think most product design starts with either a market or a price point or a manufacturing method, and then goes from there. And so I do spend a lot of time, and right now I'm working with a really amazing, really fun team of engineers to make part of this new space possible. And it's a lot of it is me asking questions. So, you know, they'll say, okay, this thing that you drew, we can't do that. We can't make this beam hang in space, just like cantilevered off of nothing, you know? And I'm like, you know, of course, my first reaction is like, ah, shucks. But then I'm like, well, but what if we did this? What if instead of cantilevering off of that cloud? What if it cantilevers off of the building? What if we had some structure here? So kind of shifting again into that kind of collaborative brainstorming. And sorry, my dog is drinking water really loudly right now.
Oh, that's totally fine. That's totally fine.
And kind of leading with a what if,
yes.
I think is a very fun way. Like they know, like the engineers I'm working with, they know how things work and they know how to make things work. And sometimes it takes, me asking what if this, which is also me being willing to change the design in order to make it feasible.
Right.
And like I said, to have something new or really interesting and innovative, I think it requires me ignoring the rules and then them being able to figure out new rules in order to take something that's really new and make it also buildable, right?
Yep.
And then somewhere in between, of course, we're also, I'm still keeping my like anthropometric data in place, and we're looking at the, consumer product safety and ASTM standards and thinking about, well, that's kind of a slide. Normally a slide needs 8 inches off of here and has to be this wide and like head entrapment. So we're using the rules where they apply to make it safe, but we're not starting with the rules.
Yes. No, I think that's a brilliant way actually to just sort of wrap this conversation up. I think we're at a point now where this idea of being open to new considerations and not being afraid to experiment is really a space that a lot of places, sectors, businesses are as we're coming out of the pandemic. I know here, certainly at the Franklin Institute, we are thinking about reimagining as we approach our 200th anniversary in 2024.
Oh, nice.
So we've got some things that we're, working on too. So yeah, this has been such a great conversation. I hate that we have to wrap it up. I feel like we could talk for another hour. There's so much to discuss here.
Can
Sure, please.
I just want to leave everybody with one thought, I think, related to that, which is, I think right now it's so important that we let ourselves be comfortable kind of lingering in the unknown, right? Like, I think if we have this instinct to, no, it's fine, we're going to be fine, we know how to do this. I think we're going to kind of miss some opportunities to improve and also just if we're comfortable, it's going to be unknown. We're not going to know. And if that's not okay, then this isn't going to be okay. But if we're comfortable in that and we can kind of like really look around and see new opportunities, or just let ourselves be there. So in the next few years, I think, especially as people who generate ideas and make things, like, be comfortable lingering let yourself linger in the unknown.
That's a great way to end, actually. Thank you so much, Cass. I know Ben and I have enjoyed talking with you today. Ben is feeling a little sick today. That's why he's green. No, just teasing. I was told earlier he looks like a zombie Ben. But anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you for being such a fantastically incredible human being, and for all the work that you do to inspire not only young people, but all people to be thinking about creativity and play and being comfortable just sort of relishing in that. I think oftentimes, particularly as adults, we get so focused on our fixed way of thinking and doing, and so I think you're helping us get comfortable with just letting ourselves kind of relax a bit and not be so rigid. Yeah, you know what I mean? So I just, again, thank you. And if the opportunity ever presents itself to work together, that would be awesome. And then also too, here at the Franklin Institute, we'll just continuing to be inspired by your work. And I hope there's an opportunity to connect with you again as well. So thanks, folks. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank everybody for tuning in to Engineering for Good. Stay safe out there. We're about to approach summer, and I know everybody's itching to get out and about. So, wish everybody well, and I'll see you here next time. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.